For decades, they were Hollywood's perfect fantasy. Men who could ride off into the sunset with steely eyes and kiss their leading ladies like it was real. Women who were diamond-clad, untouchable in the spotlight. But off-screen, their true loves lived in the shadows, hidden by studio contracts, fake relationships, and the fear that one photo could end it all. In this video, we take you deep into Hollywood's darkest backstage corners, where 10 stars guarded the greatest secret of their lives until the day they went to their grave. Burt Lancaster, the masculine icon and the secret behind the infamous third dressing room at the Paramount lot. To millions, he was the man every woman desired and every man envied. A towering frame, squared shoulders like a soldier, eyes that could hold a scene in silence, and a smile sharp enough to stop a heartbeat. On screen, Burt Lancaster was untouchable. Off screen, according to some accounts, he lived in a world of closed doors and unspoken rules. Hollywood in the early 1950s was a place where contracts didn't just control the films you made, they reportedly dictated the life you were allowed to live. If your image sold tickets, the studio might decide your clothes, your companions, and above all, who you could love. It was in the summer of 1952, as From Here to Eternity prepared for production, that whispers began to circle about the infamous third dressing room at the Paramount lot. To most, it was just another room, but to some members of the late-night crew, it became legend. When filming reportedly ran past midnight, the heavy oak door would click shut from the inside. A warm amber glow seeped from beneath the frame, and the hallway filled with the slow hum of a jazz record turning. Burt arrived first, measured, deliberate steps. Minutes later came James Marlowe, a young Broadway dancer with lightning in his eyes and a smile like fire. Once the door closed, no one entered. No one dared to knock. A veteran makeup artist decades later recalled with a faint smile, "If the door was locked and the music was still playing, the night wasn't over yet." Their connection was never spoken aloud, but it didn't remain invisible. In 1993, a declassified FBI memo reportedly revealed that J. Edgar Hoover himself had ordered surveillance on Burt, citing moral risks tied to exclusive gatherings at a Malibu estate, parties attended only by men, many of them fresh faces just signed with Columbia. In July 1960, Confidential magazine was said to have received an unmarked envelope. Inside was a single photograph. Burt on the deck of a cruise ship in Greece, holding hands with a tanned man whose face turned slightly from the camera. On the back, in rushed handwriting, were the words, "He said we were forever. Now he won't even return my calls." The public never saw it. Just weeks later, according to some reports, the studio paid $15,000 to make the picture, and the problem disappear. Even his 23-year marriage to his wife, Norma Anderson, was described by some insiders as being built on unspoken terms. A Columbia publicist once said, "As long as the leading man image stayed perfect, it didn't matter who he loved after the cameras stopped rolling." But sometimes the mask slipped. During the filming of The Swimmer in 1968, a supporting actor allegedly made a joke about Burt's sexuality. Burt didn't laugh. He reportedly hit the man hard enough to draw blood. Police arrived in minutes. The studio's lawyers arrived faster, and the incident vanished from the record. Then came 1973. Burt was said to be ready to leave Hollywood, move to Italy, and live openly with a man he loved, a French ballet dancer. They had chosen a villa outside Florence. 2 months before the move, a car accident near Nice ended that dream in an instant. Burt withdrew from acting for 5 years. Friends said he became quieter, slower to smile, as if a part of him had been lost forever. To the public, he remained the legend, the perfect masculine ideal. But some believe the greatest role Burt Lancaster ever played was keeping the truth of his heart hidden until the day he went to his grave. Cary Grant, the man who made charm look effortless and whose off-screen life was a script no studio dared to film. To the public, Cary Grant was Hollywood elegance made flesh. A tuxedo draped over his frame as naturally as sunlight falls on the ocean. On screen, he could make danger look debonair, chasing spies across rooftops, stealing jewels with a wink, kissing his leading ladies as if the film itself might burn without him. But when the cameras stopped, there was another story. One played out in beach houses with shuttered windows, in rented villas where the guest lists were never printed, and in photographs that disappeared before the ink could dry. In the early 1930s, long before North by Northwest, Cary shared a Malibu home with fellow actor Randolph Scott. The press called it Bachelor Hall and ran photos of the two men in matching trousers, grilling steaks on the porch, lounging by the pool. Some readers saw nothing unusual. Studio executives saw a ticking clock. Behind closed doors, Paramount executives ordered a new narrative. The dashing Cary must be seen with women, actresses, heiresses, anyone photogenic enough to silence whispers. Premieres became carefully staged productions, with red carpet dates arranged days in advance. Marriage followed, brief, almost surgical, before ending without public scandal. Yet the connection between Cary and Randolph refused to vanish. Neighbors spoke of late-night lights in the beach house long after Cary had supposedly moved out. A former studio photographer once admitted that his negatives from a Palm Springs shoot vanished after a producer saw an image of the two men laughing together in a way no headline could safely explain. And then there were the disappearances. In 1954, during the filming of To Catch a Thief, Cary slipped away for 3 days. The official report, illness, but a crew member claimed he saw Cary boarding a private plane to Mexico with an unidentified man, returning before dawn on the 4th day as if nothing had happened. Cary's later years were marked by a string of short marriages and even shorter public romances. But to those who knew him well, his most genuine smiles appeared in moments far from the spotlight, sailing quietly at dusk, walking barefoot on empty beaches, or sharing breakfast in kitchens where no reporters could follow. The world remembers Cary Grant as the ultimate leading man, untouched by scandal. Yet Hollywood insiders will tell you there were reels of his life that never made it to the screen, stories locked away in drawers, guarded as tightly as the man himself. Paul Newman, the love letters never sent. Those dazzling blue eyes could freeze a room mid-breath. On screen, he was perfection, the unshakable hero, the charmer every woman dreamed of. But behind that flawless exterior was a silence so deep, few ever guessed it was there. In the summer of 1955, Newman was Hollywood's golden newcomer, all talent, beauty, and promise. But during the filming of East of Eden, something began that would never make it into any press release. James Dean, quiet, magnetic, with a gaze that seemed to look through walls, was rumored to have become more than just a co-star. They took morning walks, no one interrupted, lingered in dressing rooms long after the crew had gone home. A makeup artist caught glimpses, a manager kept a few behind-the-scenes photographs for later. Soon, a strange clause began to appear in Newman's contracts, forbidding close personal ties with male co-stars outside filming hours. Officially, it was image protection. Unofficially, everyone knew. By the early 1970s, whispers had shifted to a cabin in the Sundance Mountains of Utah. The deed listed no name, but one visitor came like clockwork: Robert Redford. Neighbors swore they saw the two men on the porch for hours, lost in conversation under autumn skies. Not ordinary friends, not strangers. Whatever it was, it lasted for decades in near total silence. Joanne Woodward, Newman's wife of over 50 years, never spoke publicly about the rumors, but one crew member from Winning remembered the day she quietly demanded a young lighting assistant be removed from the set after finding him alone with Paul in the dressing room. No drama, just one sentence to the director: "If he stays, I can't continue." And like so many Hollywood scandals, it ended before it began. In 1985, after Rock Hudson's AIDS diagnosis became public, Newman drafted notes for an interview with Barbara Walters. He was said to have intended to reveal a truth he'd guarded for decades, that he had once loved a man, and that love had changed his life. Hours before the taping, studio lawyers arrived with an image clause. The interview was canceled. No explanation. None needed. Those who worked close to Newman sometimes spoke of the toll his relentless schedule took on him. In quiet offices far from the cameras, studio medics tried to keep his exhaustion at bay. A cocktail of rest cures, night watches, and the sort of medication more often given to those battling the darkest illnesses. None of it ever reached the tabloids. His file stayed buried in locked drawers. When his belongings were cataloged after his death, an unremarkable steel box drew curiosity. Inside were a few personal notes, a handful of photographs, and several sealed envelopes signed only with initials. Old friends recognized the handwriting and understood who they were from, but no one spoke of the contents. Whatever they held, Newman had kept them private for a reason. Newman's marriage to Joanne Woodward seemed to the outside world untouchable. A union of romance and mutual respect. Few knew that the studios of the era kept a close watch on their stars' personal lives, nudging them toward partnerships that matched a marketable image. In Paul and Joanne's case, the push was unnecessary. They already had the chemistry the cameras craved. In his final year, a different kind of story made its way through whispered conversations. An off-duty meeting with a longtime friend at a roadside cafe, laughter over coffee, a hand resting briefly in a moment of quiet camaraderie. There were no staged lights, no photographers in sight, except for one whose picture was never meant for headlines. It ended up in private hands, just like so many parts of Newman's life the public never saw. Montgomery Clift, the tragedy behind the perfect face. On screen, Montgomery Clift was magnetic, the sensitive rebel, the man whose eyes seemed to carry both a promise and a warning. Director said he didn't just act, he let you see inside him. Women fell in love with him, men wanted to be him. And yet, the closer you got to the real Clift, the more you realized that charm was a kind of armor, polished to perfection, hiding a truth Hollywood could never allow. In the late 1940s, Clift arrived in Los Angeles already carrying whispers from Broadway. A few insiders knew about his private world, but the unspoken rule was simple. You can be anything you want, as long as the cameras never see it. During the filming of Red River in 1948, a young production assistant recalled an afternoon when Clift slipped away between takes with a crew member. They returned 20 minutes later, hair slightly rumpled, exchanging glances that said more than words ever could. No one asked questions. Asking could end your career. His closest bond was with theater actor Kevin McCarthy. To the public, they were old friends who shared an apartment for a time in New York. In reality, they moved through life like two halves of a secret. They went to dinners, rehearsals, and midnight jazz clubs, always arriving separately, always leaving with minutes between them. In press photos from that era, McCarthy often appears just out of focus, as if the camera knew to keep him on the edge of the frame. Elizabeth Taylor would become his most trusted confidant. She called him Monty and defended him fiercely. Knowing better than most, the careful dance he had to perform. In May 1956, she saved his life, pulling him from the wreckage after he crashed his car into a telephone pole just down the hill from her house. The official story blamed exhaustion, but a close friend claimed the crash happened as Clift tried to lose a car that had been following him for days. A tabloid photographer who had earlier caught him in a quiet, unmistakable moment by Taylor's pool with another man. The negatives were never seen again. The accident left his once perfect face subtly changed. On screen, makeup and lighting softened the differences, but in person, they were undeniable. Friends said something shifted in him after that night. A certain brightness gone, replaced by long silences. His drinking increased. Roles came less often. When he did work, he was still brilliant, but slower to smile, quicker to disappear once the camera stopped. In the early 1960s, neighbors in New York often saw a tall man in a dark coat leaving Clift's townhouse late at night. No one could ever identify him. Some said it was McCarthy. Others believed it was a photographer who had once tried to expose him, now turned into a strange sort of companion. On July 22, 1966, Clift's housekeeper found him in bed, gone at just 45 years old. Officially, it was a heart attack, but the nurse who'd cared for him during his final months told a journalist years later that the night before, Clift had spent hours watching The Misfits, his film with Marilyn Monroe, and reading a worn envelope. She wouldn't reveal who it was from, only that when she last saw him, he was smiling faintly at something written inside. Whatever those words were, they went with him. Another piece of Montgomery Clift's life that Hollywood would never put on screen. Greta Garbo, the woman who vanished from the screen, but not from Whispersboro. Greta Garbo was more than a star. She was an apparition. The Swedish beauty who spoke little, smiled rarely, and yet held every gaze as if she'd bewitched the entire world. On screen, she could be a queen, a courtesan, or a tragic lover. Off-screen, she was the most elusive figure in Hollywood. People called her the divine, but what she truly worshipped was her privacy. In the 1930s, Garbo's face was everywhere. Movie posters, magazine covers, newsreels. But the woman behind that image lived a life with locked doors and carefully drawn blinds. Friends said she often invited guests to her Beverly Hills home for tea at 4 p.m., only to answer the door herself in silk pajamas, hair unbrushed, speaking in a low murmur. The guest list was always small, and almost always the same. A circle of women who shared her taste for art, travel, and secrecy. Among them was Mercedes de Acosta, a playwright and socialite known for her stormy romances with some of Hollywood's most glamorous women. The two traveled together, exchanged dozens of letters, and sometimes spent weeks in Europe, far from the glare of the studios. In one surviving note, Garbo wrote, "We are alike, you and I. The world would not understand." That letter, smudged and creased from years of being folded, is now locked away in a private collection, its full contents never published. Garbo's distaste for the press became legendary. She once turned down an Oscar invitation simply by sending back the envelope unopened. She avoided interviews, refusing to explain herself to the public. But those who worked on her sets noticed subtle rebellions. A lingering touch with a female co-star during rehearsals, a coded glance to someone waiting just off stage. A cameraman from Queen Christina claimed that one close-up, Garbo gazing dreamily into the distance, was actually her looking straight at a woman standing behind the lights. By 1941, at just 36, Garbo walked away from Hollywood without warning. No farewell tour, no press statement. She boarded a ship to Sweden and left the industry in shock. Yet the most curious part wasn't her disappearance from the screen. It was the life she led after. In New York, where she eventually settled, Neighbors spoke of a tall, striking woman walking alone through Central Park in oversized coats and dark glasses. Sometimes, another woman walked beside her, their heads tilted close together in deep conversation, hands brushing briefly before parting ways. When Garbo died in 1990, her personal effects were sent to a storage facility in Manhattan. Months later, an auction catalog quietly listed a bundle of sealed envelopes, all addressed in the same looping handwriting, all marked private. The buyer was anonymous. Their contents remain a mystery. To the world, Greta Garbo will always be the woman who wanted to be alone. But to those who caught her rare, unguarded moments, she was someone else entirely. A woman who loved in shadows and carried those shadows with her until the end. Dirk Bogarde, a lifetime in silence. For decades, he was the intellectual gentleman of British cinema. The man who could fill a theater without ever raising his voice. Smooth, deliberate, perfectly pressed, and yet utterly unknowable. He lived alone, they said. Loved books, loved art, avoided scandal, never married. But there was one name the press never dared to print, and one man who never left his side. No one ever asked about Anthony Forwood, the co-star who became his constant companion. The man who traveled with him, stood beside him at every award show, and quietly managed his affairs for over 3 decades. They shared homes, holidays, and hospital rooms. Yet no article dared to call them partners. In an era obsessed with appearances, their closeness was an open secret wrapped in silence. In 1968, Bogarde signed a lucrative memoir deal with Harper & Row. He delivered a manuscript unlike anything the publisher expected. Over 40 pages of personal letters to Tony, along with a startling line, "I have never loved a woman, and I have never wanted to." The reaction was swift. A formal letter demanded the passages be removed to meet American moral standards, or the contract would be terminated. Bogarde withdrew the book entirely. The memoir never saw print. After his death, leaked British Library records suggested that on the day of his funeral, a cousin flew to France to collect every diary, letter, and photograph he had ever shared with Tony. The collection was locked away indefinitely, with legal threats hanging over anyone who tried to publish its contents. Only one fragment escaped, a note secretly photographed by a gardener. The handwriting trembled. "Tony loved me without asking me to say it aloud. I played 60 straight men on screen, and the world believed it. But when I held his hand in that hospital room, just once, I felt real." Etienne the gardener remembered seeing Bogarde one evening beneath the balcony, clutching a letter from Tony's chemo ward. The actor wept openly, crying in French, "How can I not love the one who's dying, simply because he's not a woman?" In 1985, the British government quietly considered him for a knighthood. According to a Guardian leak decades later, the recommendation was delayed after officials noted his long-term intimate relationship with a male companion of undefined legal status. The honor never came. When Tony died in 1988, Bogarde personally arranged the cremation and kept his ashes in a drawer for 11 years. Every morning, their housekeeper recalled, he'd open the study, glance at the drawer, and whisper, "Bonjour, mon cœur." Good morning, my heart. When Bogarde himself passed in 1999, his funeral included no mention of Tony. Not a single photograph of him was displayed. Yet on Bogarde's desk was a scrap of paper, the sentence unfinished. "The only role I truly acted was when I cooked dinner for Tony." Somewhere at Oxford University, in a drawer marked number 17, sits a sealed manuscript believed to be his final work. Its title reads, "Let me say his name once." No one has been allowed to read it. Barbara Stanwyck, the woman Hollywood called untouchable. On screen, she could be anyone. The quick-witted girl from the wrong side of the tracks, the icy femme fatale who could destroy a man with a glance, or the perfect wife every man dreamed of coming home to. Her eyes could go from warm to lethal in a single frame, and audiences couldn't look away. Off-screen, she lived by one rule: never give them more than they paid for. She rarely gave interviews, avoided public gossip, and kept her personal life behind locked doors. Reporters loved to call her fiercely independent, but there was one subject she never addressed at all. In the 1930s, quiet rumors swirled about a certain actress and her unusually close friendship with a celebrated Broadway leading lady. The two were said to have spent months traveling together, well after their stage collaboration had ended. In an era when a single whisper could shatter a career, they appeared in public just often enough to be noticed, yet never long enough to invite direct questions. By the 1940s, Barbara's name was quietly tied to several women in the industry: costumers, script supervisors, even one MGM publicist, but never in print. Studio executives had a way of keeping it that way. An MGM photographer once claimed he had developed a series of candid shots showing Barbara sitting on a blanket in Griffith Park, her hand resting over another woman's in a way no one could mistake. The negatives were destroyed before the day was over. Her marriage to actor Robert Taylor, MGM's golden boy, was a photographer's dream. They were beautiful, poised, and seemingly perfect. But insiders knew it was more of a mutually beneficial arrangement. He kept his own private life off the record, and she avoided scrutiny about hers. When they divorced in 1951, Taylor never spoke a word against her. In the early 1960s, Barbara bought a secluded ranch in the San Fernando Valley, far from the gossip of the Hollywood Hills. Neighbors noticed a housekeeper who seemed far too young to have spent decades cleaning houses, yet was always at Barbara's side, gardening, riding horses, traveling to New York for weeks at a time. When asked about her in an interview, Barbara only smiled and said, "Some people make a house clean, some people make it a home." There were also persistent stories from Paramount crew members who worked with her in the late 1930s. They remembered a locked dressing room door, the faint scent of cigarette smoke, and laughter muffled through the walls, always with the same woman visiting, always slipping away before the crew returned. One prop master claimed he once found a note tucked inside a costume pocket, reading simply, "See you at midnight." Same place. The handwriting was Barbara's. In her later years, she became a powerhouse on television, commanding respect in every room she entered. But even then, the walls around her private life never lowered. When she passed away in 1990, her will named the housekeeper as the sole heir to her personal estate, along with an unusual handwritten note, "You were the reason I always came home." Anthony Perkins, the man who could make fear look beautiful. To the world, he would always be Norman Bates, the polite, boyish motel clerk whose smile could curdle into something sinister. But behind that shy half grin, Anthony carried a secret life more fragile and far more dangerous than any role he ever played. He arrived in Hollywood in the mid-1950s, all nervous charm and awkward elegance, the kind of actor who could blush on cue. He didn't drink, he didn't party, but he did disappear, sometimes for days without explanation. Studio publicists invented excuses. He's working on a script. He's visiting family. The truth was far harder to fit into a press release. During his early Broadway days, Anthony had fallen into a quiet romance with actor Tab Hunter. They met at a small industry dinner, and for nearly 2 years they shared late-night drives along the Pacific Coast Highway, music low, headlights cutting through the mist. Friends recalled Anthony's posture changing when Tab walked into a room, shoulders softening, eyes locking, like no one else was there. But when Confidential magazine began hinting at an exposé, Paramount stepped in. Within weeks, Perkins was suddenly seen escorting starlets to premieres. All smiles for the flashbulbs. The relationship ended without a word. By the 1960s, his career was at full speed. Hitchcock had made him an icon, but fame only tightened the walls around his private life. Cast and crew from Psycho later admitted they never saw Anthony with a female co-star off set, but they did notice the same young screenwriter visiting his bungalow every Friday night, leaving only after sunrise. One grip remembered walking past and hearing the sound of a piano playing softly inside, Anthony's hands moving over the keys while a low voice hummed along. He was meticulous about avoiding evidence. No photographs, no letters, no loose words. Even close friends rarely heard him speak about love, except for one moment during the filming of Goodbye Again in Paris. Over dinner with director Anatole Litvak, Anthony reportedly stared at the Seine for a long time before saying quietly, "You can't imagine how much of my life is pretend." In the late 1970s, after years of living alone in New York, Anthony began a relationship with dancer-choreographer Grover Dale. By then, the press had shifted to newer scandals, and their partnership existed in a rare pocket of privacy. Still, Anthony avoided any public acknowledgement, even when Dale stayed with him through illness. When Anthony Perkins died in 1992 from AIDS-related complications, his public statement, dictated just weeks earlier, made no mention of lovers, male or female. But a private hospital nurse later told Vanity Fair she found a folded piece of sheet music in his bedside drawer. Across the top, in Anthony's looping handwriting, were the words, "For the one who kept me alive between the lines." Ramon Novarro, Hollywood's first Latin lover, and the mystery that lingered long after the cameras stopped. In the 1920s, his name alone could fill theaters. Perfectly sculpted features, eyes that smoldered with quiet intensity, and a charm that made him the studio's golden bet for romance. To the public, he was the exotic gentleman every woman dreamed of. Off-screen, his life followed a very different script, one the studios worked tirelessly to keep locked away. He never married. Magazines called him too devoted to his craft, or still searching for the right girl. But those close to him whispered of midnight visitors, unlisted phone numbers, and a small leather address book kept locked inside his desk. A housekeeper who worked for him in the 1930s once claimed she had seen a page of it by accident. Names written in his neat hand. Men from every corner of the industry. Studio assistants, chorus boys, young actors on the verge of fame. In his prime, Novarro was careful. No public displays, no photographs that couldn't be explained away. One Paramount photographer would later confess that a roll of film showing Novarro at the beach, his arm around another man, had been quietly misplaced in the studio archives within hours of being developed. It was never spoken of again. By the 1950s, his star had dimmed, but his private world stayed just as tightly guarded. His home in the Hollywood Hills became a gathering place for quiet evenings. Never more than half a dozen guests, all men, the curtains drawn before sunset. Neighbors said the nights often carried faint traces of piano music and low laughter drifting through the air, until both would stop suddenly, as if someone had remembered the need for silence. Friends would later recall him speaking more openly in his final years, though always in fragments. He hinted at a box of love letters hidden deep in a closet, from someone the world would never believe. Whether the writer was a fellow star, a man of great influence, or a figure far from Hollywood's lights, no one could say for certain. Then came the night of October 30th, 1968. The newspapers called it a robbery gone wrong, but the official reports told a more unsettling story. Overturned furniture, shattered glass, and framed photographs scattered across the floor. Many showing Navarro with unidentified men, their faces scratched out in ink. 2 young brothers were arrested and later convicted, claiming they had come looking for a hidden fortune from his Ben-Hur days. No such money was ever found. The studio made no comment. His funeral was small, attended mostly by aging co-stars and distant relatives. The leather address book disappeared without a trace. The box of letters, if it existed, was never recovered. And yet, the whispers have never faded. Some say the break-in was nothing more than a cover, that someone wanted not cash, but the erasure of whatever proof still remained of who Ramon Navarro truly loved, and how far someone was willing to go to keep that truth hidden forever. Walter Pidgeon, the leading man who never quite lived where people thought he did. On screen, he was the dependable hero, the commander, the father, the dignified gentleman who could calm a room just by standing in it. Off-screen, his life was harder to pin down. In the 1940s and 50s, Pidgeon kept an apartment in New York and a home in Beverly Hills, yet rarely slept in either. Train porters remembered him as a regular on the overnight run between the two cities, never with a large entourage, just a single leather case and an unlisted ticket bought in cash. One porter swore that the same sharply dressed man, not an actor, not a publicist, boarded with him almost every trip, and they would talk quietly until morning. Studio publicists explained his constant travel as business meetings or scouting stage plays, but the schedules never matched. He would vanish for days in small towns that had no theaters at all. Sometimes he would return to set with a small gift in his pocket, a hand-carved wooden pen, a pressed flower in a glass case, things that didn't look like souvenirs from business trips. In 1954, while filming Executive Suite, the MGM lot security log recorded him leaving at 11:43 p.m. in a green Packard sedan. The same car later spotted parked outside a modest craftsman house in Pasadena. The house belonged to a set designer who had worked on 3 of Pidgeon's earlier films. Neighbors recalled seeing the 2 men gardening together on Sunday mornings, though neither ever mentioned the other in public. Hollywood at the time was in the middle of a quiet but fierce crackdown on any gossip that could tarnish its biggest stars. The morality clauses in studio contracts were broad enough to cover almost anything the executives disapproved of, and they were enforced ruthlessly. One MGM publicist later admitted that anything about Walter that wasn't about his movies never made it to print. When gossip columnists tried to follow the Pasadena connection, they hit a wall. No photographs, no interviews, no one willing to speak on record. One reporter later claimed that her editor received a phone call from someone very high at the studio, warning her that printing anything personal about Pidgeon would mean the end of her career. By the 1960s, he had become one of MGM's most respected veterans, the sort of man younger actors went to for quiet advice. But those closest to him said that advice always came with a warning. Never let them write your whole story for you. In the late 70s, after his retirement, a private exhibition at a small gallery in Santa Barbara displayed candid portraits of classic Hollywood stars. One was labeled simply "Evening Guest." It showed a man in profile, reading by lamplight in a beach house living room. Visitors whispered it looked exactly like Walter Pidgeon, older, relaxed, smiling, but the owner of the photograph refused to confirm the name. And maybe that was the point. Walter Pidgeon's legacy was built on the roles he played, and on the parts of himself that no one was ever allowed to see. Under the dazzling lights of Hollywood, they were cinematic icons, idols worshipped by millions. But behind the smiles and roaring applause, they were stars forced to hide their true selves as gay men or women, all the way to the day they died. Not because they were ashamed, but because the system never allowed them to be who they truly were. So, what do you think? How many other stars lived behind that glamorous mask? And when will the truth finally be given its rightful place? Leave a comment below and tell us which story from today's video stayed with you the most. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next shocking tales from behind Hollywood's closed doors. While fans swooned over Hollywood's golden couples, the truth behind the silver screen was far darker. Studios didn't just nudge stars toward romance, they forced them into fake weddings, threatening to destroy careers if they refused. Some chose love over millions, walking away from fame. Now let's uncover the shocking stories behind the stars who paid the highest price. Behind the glamorous smiles, secrets festered. Deals were made in shadows. Imagine this. It's 1926, and Greta Garbo isn't just a movie star, she's a full-blown obsession. The mysterious Swedish beauty who barely speaks to the press, never smiles in public, and drives men absolutely insane with her silence. Fans worship her. Studios cash in on her. Paparazzi follow every step she takes. And MGM will do anything, literally anything, to keep her image perfect. There was just one problem. Garbo wasn't interested in men. According to multiple Hollywood insiders, she was secretly in love with writer Mercedes de Acosta, a woman who was well known in elite lesbian circles at the time. They exchanged letters, locked themselves away in private hotel suites, and were reportedly seen walking hand in hand behind the studio lot. It was one of Hollywood's worst-kept secrets, and MGM knew it. That same year, as whispers started leaking into the press and journalists began asking uncomfortable questions, MGM made a decision. Not a suggestion, not a negotiation, a decision. They would arrange a fake wedding to erase the rumors. The chosen groom, John Gilbert, Hollywood's most desired heartthrob. A man so popular the press literally described him as every woman's dream. MGM turned the whole thing into a marketing campaign. Magazine covers, radio hype, tabloids printing a timeline of their secret love affair. An official press release from MGM announcing the date of the ceremony. Except none of it was real. According to studio documents and several people who worked on set, MGM never even bothered asking Garbo if she wanted to get married. They simply wrote the story, shipped out the invitations, ordered the cake, hired the photographers, and booked the chapel. All Garbo had to do was show up. Smile and kiss her brand new husband in front of the cameras. Problem solved, career protected, rumors erased. Only, that's not what happened. On the morning of the wedding, while John Gilbert stood nervously in a perfectly tailored tuxedo and camera crews were waiting inside the chapel, Greta Garbo vanished. She left her house before sunrise and disappeared. No assistant, no press agent, no studio driver, no explanation at all. Just gone. One MGM publicist later admitted she refused to become part of the studio's little fairy tale. With no bride in sight, the entire event collapsed in front of stunned journalists. People were whispering in the pews. Reporters didn't know whether to leave or keep the cameras rolling. MGM panicked and tried to lie their way out of it by claiming she was too sick to attend. But only a week later, Garbo reportedly told a close friend, "I will not stand in front of the world and pretend to love someone I don't." And she meant it. From that day forward, she refused every single publicity romance the studio tried to invent for her. No more fake boyfriends, no more staged engagements, no more photo ops with handsome leading men. She chose silence and her truth over the most powerful studio in the world. And here's the terrifying part. That failed wedding wasn't just embarrassing. It was proof that Hollywood was willing to create entire marriages just to hide the sexuality of its biggest stars. So if they were willing to do that to Greta Garbo, what do you think they did to everyone else? Hollywood loved to sell the perfect love story. Tall, handsome, masculine, adored by millions of women, Rock Hudson was that story. Movie posters called him the ultimate romantic hero. Studios flooded theaters with images of him holding his on-screen girlfriends in the rain, kissing them in candlelight, sweeping them off their feet. But behind all the carefully staged kisses and perfect close-ups, Rock Hudson was living a very different reality. He was gay, and the studio knew it. According to multiple studio insiders and several biographers, Hudson's private life was an open secret inside Hollywood. He dated men quietly and attended private parties where photographers weren't allowed. But in the eyes of 1950s America, homosexuality wasn't just controversial. It was career-destroying. Then came the summer of 1955. A tabloid called Confidential magazine threatened to publish a bombshell story exposing Hudson's private relationships. The editors claimed to have first-hand proof and were preparing to run it nationwide. To Universal Studios, this wasn't gossip. It was a total disaster. Hudson was their golden boy, their box office machine, the visual definition of all-American masculinity. So the studio did what old Hollywood always did when the truth got too close. They staged a marriage. Hudson's agent quickly arranged a last-minute relationship with Hudson's own secretary, Phyllis Gates. With almost no notice, the couple was rushed into a private wedding. No questions, no time for interviews, just a photographer, a courthouse, and a front-page story the very next morning. Rock Hudson shocks fans with secret marriage. In public, it looked like a fairy tale. But in private, the marriage barely existed. Several of Hudson's close friends recall that he rarely came home after the wedding. The studio continued to arrange photo shoots of the couple, smiling at premieres, walking on the beach, sitting in fancy restaurants, every single moment carefully staged. At one point, Phyllis Gates even confronted him directly and asked whether he was attracted to men, but he stayed silent and refused to answer. 3 years later, the marriage ended quietly. No real scandal. No explosive breakup. It simply fell apart right after the rumor disappeared. The lie, however, stayed alive for decades. Then in 1985, Rock Hudson was diagnosed with AIDS. He tried to keep it private, but the truth eventually surfaced and shocked the entire world. For the first time, audiences realized that one of Hollywood's most beloved romantic icons had spent his entire life hiding who he really was, while the studio protected the illusion it built around him. And honestly, that raises a much bigger question. How many of those perfect Hollywood love stories were real, and how many were just part of the cover-up? He was Hollywood's original sex symbol, the man entire theaters screamed for in the 1920s. Newspapers called him the Latin lover and claimed women were fainting just from watching him on screen. To the public, Rudolph Valentino was every woman's fantasy. Behind the curtain, he was becoming Hollywood's prisoner. Inside the industry, people whispered that Valentino wasn't as heterosexual or masculine as the studios wanted him to be. Some believed he was bisexual. Others claimed he had no interest in the publicity-driven relationships the studio kept arranging for him. But one thing was clear: his image had to stay perfect. So the studio took control, the same way it always did. They arranged a wedding. The bride was Jean Acker, an actress who, according to many Hollywood insiders, was involved in relationships with women off-screen. There was no real courtship, just an announcement and an immediate ceremony. It was supposed to silence the rumors. Instead, it created one of the most humiliating moments in Hollywood history. On their wedding night, Acker locked Valentino out of their hotel room. He stood in the hallway, knocking, begging to be let in. She never opened the door. The marriage was never consummated. The next morning, the studio fed the press a ridiculous love story, while Valentino quietly wrote her emotional letters, confused and heartbroken. Several reporters later called it the most tragic wedding night Hollywood had ever seen. Hollywood didn't care about his humiliation. What they cared about was keeping control. When critics began calling him too feminine and newspaper columns started using the nickname the Pink Powder Puff, the executives panicked again. Their solution? Stage a second marriage. This time with costume designer Natasha Rambova. Ironically, she had already been in a relationship with another woman. According to studio insiders, Valentino was warned that refusing the second marriage would cost him every leading role he had left. Nothing about the romance was real. Not the press photos, not the honeymoon stories, not the headlines about Hollywood's most passionate couple. By 1925, the second marriage had collapsed, and Valentino's public image went with it. He tried to defend himself in interviews, insisting the rumors weren't true, but the damage was already done. 2 fake marriages, a reputation ruined by gossip, a man pressured into hiding his true identity until the day he died alone at the age of just 31. Thousands of fans cried at his funeral, never realizing they had fallen in love with a fantasy manufactured by the studio system. So let me ask you, was Rudolph Valentino really the world's greatest lover? Or just another victim of Hollywood's brutal reputation machine? In the late 1930s, Barbara Stanwyck was untouchable. Critics called her the most powerful woman in Hollywood. She played strong, independent characters on screen, and off-camera, she built a reputation for being fiercely private, almost guarded. But in a town where privacy usually meant you had something to hide, the gossip machine started to turn. Reporters began whispering, "Why hasn't she ever been seen with a man? Why don't the tabloids have a single story about her dating life?" One article even implied that she might be too masculine for traditional romance, a dangerous suggestion in 1938. Studio executives panicked. At the time, one rumor was all it took to destroy a star. So MGM made a decision. Barbara needed a husband. They didn't waste time. The studio contacted Robert Taylor, a young, handsome actor who also happened to be facing whispers about his private life. He was told the marriage would be mutually beneficial. He agreed. Overnight, every magazine in America began talking about Hollywood's newest love story. They claimed Stanwyck and Taylor had fallen in love on set, had dinner in secret, and had been hiding their relationship for months to avoid attention. None of it was true. The wedding was planned by the studio publicity department, right down to the location, the dress, even the guest list. When the big day finally arrived, Stanwyck looked like she was walking onto a film set rather than into a marriage. It only got worse. According to multiple witnesses, Taylor refused to kiss her during the ceremony. Instead of celebrating afterward, he simply thanked the guests, left the reception early, and went straight to his mother's house. Stanwyck spent her wedding night alone. One friend later said, "She didn't look like a bride, she looked like an actress doing press." And that was exactly what she was. For over 10 years, the two lived separate lives, sharing only public appearances carefully arranged by MGM. Every romantic outing photographed by the press had been scheduled in advance. In private, they slept in separate rooms, traveled separately, and rarely spoke to each other. The studio didn't care if they were unhappy. As long as the public believed the story, the machine kept moving. In 1950, Stanwyck quietly asked for a divorce. Taylor didn't argue. There was no fight, no statement, no emotion, just silence. And the quiet end of a marriage that had never really existed in the first place. Which leaves one uncomfortable truth. Sometimes Hollywood didn't ruin love stories. It built fake ones from scratch and forced people to live inside them. Hard to believe this was considered normal, isn't it? And it makes you wonder, how many other stars were trapped in scripts they never wrote? The camera flash exploded across the front page. Anthony Perkins stood next to a beautiful woman in a white wedding dress, smiling quietly like the romantic leading man Hollywood insisted he was. Fans were stunned. "Psycho star marries," the headline screamed. It looked spontaneous. It looked romantic. But according to crew members who worked with him, the wedding photo felt more like a carefully staged movie scene. Every gesture rehearsed, every angle pre-approved by the studio's publicity team. Because long before that photo existed, Anthony Perkins had already been in love. Not with a woman, but with another man. In the late 1950s, Perkins had a relationship with actor Tab Hunter that almost everyone in Hollywood already knew about. They hosted parties together. They showed up holding hands at private events. They shared an apartment. It wasn't a rumor. It was his real life. All of that disappeared the moment Psycho exploded into a national obsession. Suddenly, Perkins was no longer just an actor. He was a product. And the public expected that product to be perfectly straight. At first, the pressure was subtle. A friendly suggestion to skip certain events. A quiet reminder from a studio assistant that his friendships with other men were being talked about in the press. Then came the staged sightings, dinners with female co-stars, the paparazzi tip-offs that magically caught him just leaving a romantic restaurant. But the whispers didn't stop, and Hollywood only knows one way to kill a rumor: invent a bigger lie. Overnight, gossip columns suddenly began mentioning Perkins's secret romance with photographer Barry Berenson. Within weeks, without a single photo of them ever having been together before, an official wedding was announced. People were shocked, but the studio wasn't. They had written the story themselves. It looked perfect, which is exactly what made it terrifying. Friends later said Perkins cried the night before the ceremony, terrified that this would be the moment he'd have to say goodbye to the person he really was. After the wedding, he stopped attending parties entirely. He avoided being alone in public. In every interview, he answered questions about love with the same polite, empty smile. One person who knew him at the time said, he wasn't lying, he had simply stopped speaking. He stayed that way for the rest of his life. Even when he was diagnosed with AIDS in 1990, he refused to let the truth come out, afraid the studio-built version of himself would collapse in front of the world. He died in 1992, still playing the role Hollywood had assigned him decades earlier. Not the villain, not the heartthrob, just a man who had to act even when the cameras weren't rolling. And that's the real horror story no one ever paid to watch. The cameras flashed. Judy Garland stood in her wedding dress, smiling softly as she placed her hand on Vincente Minnelli's arm. To the public, it looked like the perfect Hollywood love story, the beloved starlet marrying the brilliant director who understood her like no one else. What the audience didn't know was that every single second of it had been rehearsed. The truth was much colder. Long before that wedding photo, Vincente Minnelli had already lived another life. In New York's theater world, he was known for his bold style, pink silk shirts, and long-term relationships with other men. He never hid it until he signed with MGM. The day he arrived in Hollywood, everything changed. According to internal studio records, he received a memo advising him to avoid overly expressive clothing and to limit private socializing with male companions. Publicists began closely monitoring his appearances. Executives even instructed him to change the way he walked and spoke in interviews. Rumors kept spreading anyway, so the studio decided to eliminate the rumors the only way Hollywood knew how. They offered him a bride. Judy Garland was the ideal solution. She was already America's sweetheart. She already carried the image of innocence. And most importantly, she already knew who Minnelli really was. Studio insiders later claimed Garland agreed because she understood how dangerous the truth could be. After all, she had been placed on amphetamines at age 16 to stay slim for the cameras. She knew exactly what Hollywood did to anyone who stepped outside the script. The wedding looked like something out of a musical. Imported flowers, perfectly timed lighting, matching white outfits. The photographers didn't capture the moment. They were scheduled for it. Inside the house, reality appeared almost instantly. Minnelli and Garland slept in different bedrooms from the very first week. During production of The Pirate, Garland reportedly walked in on Minnelli with another man. She collapsed in tears. MGM's immediate response was not to protect her. It was to sedate her, dress her, and push her back in front of the camera. A few weeks later, it happened again. This time she begged to stop filming. Studio executives didn't hesitate. They threatened to suspend her and blacklist her if she refused to finish the movie. By 1951, she couldn't play along anymore. Garland filed for divorce. Minnelli signed the papers without a fight. No public scandal, no apology. Just another Hollywood marriage quietly erased from the script, as if it had never existed at all. The public believed the fairy tale. The real story disappeared behind a headline that had been written before the wedding even took place. And that may be the most disturbing part. In old Hollywood, the danger wasn't on screen. It was behind the scenes, where every secret had a price and every lie became someone's life. In the 1940s, no actor drew bigger crowds than Tyrone Power. He was the studio's most bankable star, a swashbuckling hero, a war veteran, a man whose name alone was enough to sell out theaters. The press called him the embodiment of male desire. But inside Hollywood, people were whispering something else. Behind closed doors, Power was rumored to have had intense relationships with several male actors, most notably Cesar Romero. They were seen together at private gatherings, sharing hotel suites on European trips, and disappearing from film sets for days at a time. According to several people on the lot, one private photo of the two men reportedly sparked panic among executives and was immediately destroyed. For years, the studio managed to bury the stories. Then one day, the whispers got too loud. Columnists began openly questioning his private life. Executives panicked. Power was called into a private office and quietly warned that the next rumor to hit the front page could end his entire career. Soldier, hero, and all. Power knew exactly what that meant, so he did what he thought might save him. He chose a bride. French actress Annabella was smart, elegant, and enormously respected. Most importantly, she had no connection to the gay rumors already circling Power. He married her quickly, before the studio could force him into something even more controlled. But instead of helping, the marriage turned into another script he had to perform. Studio publicists immediately began promoting it as Hollywood's most beautiful love story. They staged interviews, photo shoots, carefully written letters published in magazines. Annabella played along because she loved him. Power tried to play along too, but the truth didn't disappear. He continued meeting Cesar Romero in secret. He even took a 6-week vacation to South America with him, while still married. and reporters who followed them were quietly paid off or reassigned before anything made it to print. People on set started using a new nickname behind his back: the leading man who always disappears with the wrong person. By 1946, the marriage had fallen apart. Annabella confronted him repeatedly. According to friends, she once asked him whether he even knew who he was anymore. Power couldn't answer. They separated that same year. The studio spun it as a tragic distance caused by work commitments. Fans believed every word. Some even sent flowers to the studio to show support for his heartbreak. Nobody realized the real heartbreak was happening for a reason he was never allowed to say out loud. Because in Hollywood, falling in love with the wrong person wasn't just dangerous. It could turn even the most powerful man alive into someone who spent his whole life running. If you were in his place, would you have chosen love or survival? Sometimes the answer says more about us than we think. Champagne gigs at midnight. Broadway stars gathered in hidden salons. Cole Porter sitting at the piano, improvising new melodies, while young dancers draped themselves over velvet chairs and laughed at jokes too scandalous to print. For years, his parties weren't parties. They were events whispered about across 2 continents. Everyone knew Porter preferred the company of men. Everyone also knew he wrote some of the most romantic love songs in American history. It was a contradiction, and people loved it. But when Night and Day exploded nationwide and Porter became more than just a composer, when he became a national celebrity, that contradiction suddenly turned dangerous. According to people in his circle, certain theater donors started expressing concern about persistent rumors. A radio sponsor privately claimed the public loved Cole's music but might not accept his private lifestyle. And then came the studio note: the songs are perfect, the image needs adjusting. That's when Porter made a decision that stunned even his closest friends. He proposed, but not for love. Linda Lee Thomas was elegant, wealthy, and respected in every high society circle that mattered. Most importantly, she understood that Porter's proposal wasn't romantic. It was strategic. They married in Paris in 1919 in front of nobility and press. The event was so flawless that one newspaper called it a wedding worthy of royalty. But a longtime friend later confessed that the celebration felt eerily controlled, like a beautifully staged show. After the wedding, the myth began. Porter and Linda became the definition of sophistication. Interviews described them as inseparable. Magazines published posed photos of them sitting together at grand pianos, staring into each other's eyes. Behind the facade, things were very different. Porter continued seeing men, and Linda quietly protected him. She walked out of parties early when she knew Cole wanted to stay behind. She redirected suspicious guests, invented entire stories when someone showed up at the wrong time. One friend later said, she didn't marry him because she loved him. She loved him enough to let him live. It worked. The public believed the fairy tale and never bothered to look any closer. But every so often, the masks slipped. Like the night a journalist reportedly saw Porter holding a young man's hand in the hallway at 2 a.m. and the entire column mysteriously disappeared before print. Still, Porter never explained. Linda never betrayed him. And the lie became a permanent part of the legacy. They stayed together for 34 years. Not because it was a love story, but because it was the only story the world would accept. Some people say that's tragic. Others say it was genius. What do you think? When Mutiny on the Bounty premiered in 1935, audiences were stunned. Charles Lofton's performance as the brutal Captain Bligh wasn't just good, it was terrifying. Newspapers called him the most commanding male presence in cinema. To millions of people, he became the face of raw, uncompromising masculinity. Studio executives were thrilled. They had finally found the perfect alpha male star. But the man walking out of the premiere that night, surrounded by applause and flashing cameras, wasn't the man people thought he was. Because long before Hollywood claimed him, Charles Laughton had already lived another truth. Back in London, during his early days in the theater, he had quietly fallen in love with a young actor. It wasn't a secret among the company. People knew, and nobody judged him. But when he arrived in Hollywood in the early 1930s, that secret suddenly became dangerous. A studio executive allegedly warned him, "People love your talent. Don't give them a reason to look behind the curtain." Raised in a strict Catholic family, Laughton spent years trying to correct himself. He read religious texts. He tried dating women. He kept telling himself that it would eventually change. It didn't. And when he married actress Elsa Lanchester in 1929, he finally confessed the truth to her. Quietly, privately, ashamed. Instead of leaving, she simply sat down and said, "You don't need to lie to me." From that moment on, their marriage became something Hollywood didn't understand, a partnership, not a love story. Laughton threw himself into his work. Henry VIII, Quasimodo, Captain Bligh. Audiences couldn't get enough. And with every role, the studio leaned harder into the myth of Charles Laughton. Powerful, dominant, desirable. Meanwhile, at home, he could barely look at himself in the mirror. According to Elsa's memoir, Laughton went through long periods of silence and self-doubt. He refused to attend certain parties, terrified he would slip and expose the truth. He sometimes sat at the piano in the middle of the night, playing the same melody over and over until his hands shook. One night, as rumors began circulating again, the studio allegedly told Elsa, "Make sure he keeps his private life private. You know what would happen if people started asking the wrong questions." Elsa understood. She hosted dinners, smiled for photos. She even sat next to him during interviews, so he wouldn't have to answer difficult questions. They lived like that for decades. Two brilliant artists, trapped in a situation that protected them from the world, but kept them from being themselves. Elsa later wrote, "He wasn't ashamed of who he was ashamed that he wasn't allowed to live it." They stayed married for more than 30 years, not because of romance, because of trust. Some people still call it a tragedy, others call it loyalty, but whatever it was never freedom. By 1930, William "Billy" Haynes wasn't just a movie star. He was Hollywood's #1 box office draw. He had that rare combination of charm and confidence that made audiences fall in love the second he stepped on screen. But unlike so many of his colleagues, Haynes never pretended to be someone he wasn't. Everyone in town knew he shared his home and his life with Jimmy Shields. They hosted elegant dinner parties behind tall hedges in Brentwood, invitation only, no press allowed. People whispered that it was the one place in town where everybody could finally be themselves. Hollywood knew. They just didn't talk about it. Until one night in 1933, when Haynes was arrested in a YMCA room with a sailor. The next morning, studio head Louis B. Mayer summoned him without warning. Haynes walked into the office thinking it would be a warning. Instead, Mayer leaned forward and said, "Marry a woman now, or this town will spit you out." That wasn't a suggestion. It was a command, the same command every closeted star had quietly obeyed before him. But Haynes didn't obey. He looked Mayer in the eye and said, "I'm already married." He wasn't talking about a publicity deal. He was talking about Jimmy. Mayer fired him immediately. Executives from rival studios cut off negotiations in a matter of hours. By the end of the week, it was like William Haynes had never existed at all. Someone who worked in the publicity department later said, "We were told to eliminate his name from everything, upcoming films, press lists, even internal memos." Haynes went home and told Jimmy what had happened. According to friends, Jimmy didn't ask him to reconsider or hide. He simply poured 2 drinks and said, "Then we start again." And they did. They opened an interior design company out of their house. At first, it sounded impossible. 2 former actors rebuilding their lives from scratch. But soon Hollywood's biggest names were secretly hiring them to transform their homes, inside the same town that had erased him. William Haynes built a second career on his own terms. Joan Crawford, Clark Gable, Carole Lombard, they all used him. None of them forgot that he was the only one who had chosen love over lies. He and Jimmy stayed together for almost 50 years. When Haynes died of lung cancer in 1973, Jimmy sat beside the bed and refused to leave the room for 3 days. 3 months later, unable to live without him, he took his own life and left a note that simply read, "I now find it impossible to go on alone." 2 graves, side by side. He lost everything the studio could take away, the fame, the roles, the money. But in the end, he became the one thing no one else in the story was allowed to be: free. Would you have made the same choice, even if it meant giving up everything? Hollywood built an empire on bright lights, perfect smiles, and stories that were never real. Behind those headlines weren't scandals, they were human beings, forced to trade freedom for survival. And the real question is, has anything truly changed? Or are we still living with the same lies, just in a different disguise? If this story made you feel something, anger, sadness, or respect, leave a comment and share your thoughts. And don't forget to hit subscribe, because Hollywood still has secrets left to tell. Because trust me, Hollywood still has a few secrets left. Behind the camera, the darkest stories Hollywood doesn't want us to know. Some were forced to trade their bodies for roles. Some were blackmailed into silence. And some spent their lives as prisoners of secrets too dangerous to reveal. So who are they? Why did these A-list celebrities, men who seemingly had it all, sell themselves out so early in their careers? All will be revealed in today's video. Before he was Hollywood's most desired man. Before women fainted in theaters just to watch his lips touch the screen. Rudolph Valentino was nothing more than a poor Italian immigrant, wandering the streets of New York with empty pockets and even emptier hopes. He dreamed of fame. He dreamed of wealth. But what he found instead, according to whispers from those who knew him, was hunger, humiliation, and a bargain that would follow him like a ghost. Valentino's early years, as biographer Emily Leiter notes, were a blur of survival. He scrubbed dishes, tended gardens, and finally landed work as a waiter. But here's the twist. He wasn't fired for laziness or for theft. No, rumor has it he was dismissed for being too friendly with certain male clients. That smile, those dark magnetic eyes, they drew attention. Dangerous attention. Then came the invitation. A whisper in the night, a secret too dark for daylight. Valentino, they say, was introduced to an underground club known only by insiders, Miki. On the surface, just another name. But behind its doors, a forbidden marketplace. Wealthy, powerful men choosing beautiful boys for the night. And those boys had no choice but to say yes, $50. In 1915, it was a fortune. For Valentino, desperate, illegal, constantly looking over his shoulder in fear of deportation, it was survival. Some accounts suggest he resisted at first, that he wanted no part in it. But when the threat came, one call to the police and you're finished, he surrendered. And so week after week, strangers came to claim him like property. But not all were strangers. One name whispers louder than the rest. Norman Carey, actor, producer, a man with power in Hollywood. Was he just another client? Or was he the one who saw potential beyond the scandal? Because soon after, Carrie brought Valentino west, to California, to destiny. In 1921, the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse hit the screen. Overnight, Valentino became the Latin lover. Women fainted in theaters. Men seethed with jealousy. The immigrant boy who once sold himself for survival was suddenly the most desired man in America. But fame cannot erase the past. Behind the tuxedos, behind the piercing gaze, behind the roses thrown at his feet, Valentino carried scars. After his death, a note was found, scrawled in his hand. Its words still echo with chilling ambiguity. The world calls me their lover, but the first night I lay still, no one kissed me at all. What did it mean? Was it a confession of that first night in Mickey's shadowy rooms? A cry of shame from the man worshipped as passion itself? Or just the tortured memory of someone who sold pieces of his soul long before Hollywood ever put his name in lights? No one knows. But the legend of Rudolph Valentino isn't just about the heartthrob who made women scream. It's about the boy who stepped into the shadows and perhaps never truly escaped them. He was only 20. A boy from Indiana with nothing but a bus ticket, a strange haunted face, and a hunger to be seen. James Dean arrived in Los Angeles with no money, no contacts, no auditions. But sometimes, innocence is the most dangerous currency of all. At the Chateau Marmont Hotel, once nicknamed Hollywood's after-hours casting office, whispers say Dean was noticed almost immediately. Not for his talent, not for his charm, but for something else. He was quiet. He didn't ask questions. He didn't fight back. One bartender later recalled a private party where young men weren't introduced by names, but by numbers. Dean, with his messy curls and sad eyes, was number 6. Guests liked him because he was pliable, malleable, a boy who looked like he could break, and maybe already had. Among the first to pull him from the shadows was Rogers Brackett, a seasoned theater director from New York. Brackett wasn't just a mentor. Some say he was a sponsor. Others call him something darker. Actress Christine White, who lived nearby, once confessed that she often heard Dean crying in Brackett's bathroom at 3 in the morning. Yet every sunrise, Dean would emerge composed, his face wiped clean, ready to play the part of the charming newcomer. But the price of that mentorship was steep. Dean began appearing at exclusive parties, where cocktails weren't the only things on the menu. According to stories passed through the industry, he was once asked to spend the night with an older investor in exchange for a television role. He didn't say no, because he couldn't. He knew one yes might buy him freedom from washing dishes at that Sunset Boulevard diner. Then came the rumor of the tape. A friend claimed Dean was secretly filmed inside a Wilshire Boulevard penthouse, entertaining a powerful studio executive. The film never surfaced, but whispers say it was enough to keep him bound, a leash of celluloid wrapped around his neck. From then on, James Dean's life was no longer his own. What he wore, where he went, who he dated. Every detail, every movement was curated by faceless handlers in the shadows. Friends noticed he became colder, paranoid, always glancing over his shoulder as if he knew someone was watching. Perhaps they were. He had traded pieces of himself for the promise of immortality, and for a fleeting moment he had it. East of Eden, rebel without a cause, giant. 3 roles that burned with raw power, 3 films that made him eternal. But glory in Hollywood is often a poisoned gift. In 1955, at just 24, Dean's life ended in a violent car crash on a lonely highway. To the world, it was an accident. To those who knew how he lived, some whispers remain. Was it fate, recklessness, or just another price extracted by the shadows he could never escape? They called him a genius, a rebel, a god on screen. But behind the camera, whispers painted a very different picture of Marlon Brando. A man willing to pay Hollywood's highest price just to climb to the very top. It was said that, at a press party in 1975, Brando raised his glass with a sly grin and allegedly declared, "I slept with anyone who could give me a part. Male or female, it didn't matter, as long as they had power." That line, later cited by Vanity Fair in 2001, became more than just a scandalous quote. For many, it was a rare glimpse into the shadows of American cinema, a place where flesh and ambition were traded like currency. Back in the 1940s, Brando wasn't yet a legend. He was just another hungry young actor in New York, bouncing from one dingy stage to another. According to stories whispered in theater circles, it was an aging director, George Cukor, who first placed a real price tag on Brando's talent. Some claimed Brando received $300 a week in exchange for late-night rehearsals at Cukor's lavish Beverly Hills home. And when the spotlight seemed just out of reach, it was reportedly Cukor himself who made a single phone call to Elia Kazan, a call that led to Brando's electrifying role as Stanley Kowalski in A Streetcar Named Desire. But that was only the beginning. Rumors suggest Brando quickly learned the system, playing the game with ruthless charm. Directors, producers, even reporters, anyone with influence could become a stepping stone. A leaked diary said to have surfaced after his death allegedly listed 14 men who helped Brando with both their power and their bodies. Among those names, whispered most often, was Jack Warner, the iron-fisted studio boss behind Warner Brothers. Some stories even claim Warner shielded Brando from a sex scandal in 1953, ensuring he stayed untouchable long enough to shine in Julius Caesar. But the trade-offs were not always survivable. In hushed tones, insiders still recall one young actor Brando once mentored, a boy who, encouraged to walk the same shadowy path, entered the same secret rooms but never came back out. His career vanished before it even began, consumed by the same machinery Brando had managed to bend to his will. Brando himself would later mock Hollywood's hypocrisy, bragging about lovers of both sexes, as if daring the world to expose him. Yet behind the bravado, questions lingered. Was he confessing or covering up? Was he laughing at the industry or at himself? The official record shows Brando as a genius, the man who reshaped acting forever. But in the murkier archives of rumor and memory, another picture emerges. A man who conquered Hollywood, not just with talent, but with every secret weapon he could use. Even his own body. And perhaps that's the real scandal, that for Marlon Brando, survival and stardom were never separate. They were the same game. In the early 1960s, America had Route 66. It wasn't just a show, it was an anthem for freedom, rebellion, and adventure on the open road. And at the heart of it all was George Maharis. As Buzz Murdoch, he had the perfect combination. Sharp cheekbones, rugged masculinity, and a quiet danger behind his eyes. To millions of women, he was irresistible. To men, he was the guy they wanted to be, or secretly wanted to have. For a few shining years, Maharis looked unstoppable. But Hollywood has a way of turning its brightest stars into shadows. The fall began one cold night in November 1967. The Los Angeles Times carried a headline almost no one remembers today. But in that era, it was enough to kill a career instantly. TV actor arrested in public restroom for indecent conduct. The man in the headline was George Maharis. The official version, preserved in dry court documents, said Maharis was caught in the restroom of the Westwood Hotel, entangled with an undercover LAPD officer. But the whispers around Hollywood told a much darker story. Some claimed Maharis had been followed for weeks, deliberately targeted because of rumors about his private life. Others said he was set up by powerful studio men who wanted him silent, out of the way, replaced by someone more manageable. Whatever the truth, the result was the same. Maharis's career imploded overnight. Directors who once praised his raw talent now muttered another line in hushed voices. Everyone knew from the start he wasn't cast for his acting. He was beautiful, and he was obedient. Obedient to whom? That part was never clear. Some insiders believed Maharis had been kept early in his career, quietly sponsored by men who could open doors on television. One casting assistant later told a journalist off the record that Buzz Murdoch was born in the back room, not the audition room. True or not, the scandal was enough. CBS, advertisers, producers, they dropped him with surgical precision, as though he had never existed. Route 66 rolled on, but Maharis was erased. After that, he disappeared. No interviews, no tell-all memoirs, no confessions. He lived quietly, almost like a ghost, in sharp contrast to the man who once ruled America's living rooms. Some said he was hiding shame. Others insisted he was hiding secrets far more explosive than one arrest. A rumor, never proven, circulated for years that Maharis had kept letters, photographs, evidence that could have ruined studio heads if revealed. Was his silence bought? Or was it simply the silence of a man broken by the cruelest system in entertainment? George Maharis died decades later, remembered only by die-hard fans of Route 66. But for those who still whisper about him, his story is more than just a footnote in TV history. It is a reminder of Hollywood's darkest bargain: beauty as currency, obedience as survival, and the speed with which a single headline could turn a star into an exile. Perhaps the real scandal is not what happened in that restroom, but what happened afterward, when an entire industry chose to destroy a man rather than confront its own hypocrisy. They called him the All-American Boy. The smile, the golden hair, the kind of face mothers trusted and teenagers worshipped. In the 1950s, Tab Hunter wasn't just a star. He was the Dream Machine's poster child, the boy next door who seemed too perfect to be real. And maybe that was the problem. The first cracks appeared in 1950. He was just 19 when police records placed him at a Long Beach party, one later described as indecent. For an unknown actor, it could have been fatal. One headline, one whisper in the wrong column, and his career would have died before it even began. But that didn't happen. The story vanished almost overnight. According to Hollywood lore, a powerful producer stepped in, bailed him out of more than jail, and offered something bigger, a 5-year studio contract. Friends would later suggest the contract wasn't signed with ink, but with silence and submission. Years on, when asked about it, Hunter only smirked. "I didn't lose anything. I just had to stay the night with someone I couldn't say no to." From then on, the machine closed around him. The studio realized his face was too valuable to risk. Everything was arranged: who he dated, what he wore, even how he smiled on command. Natalie Wood, Debbie Reynolds, countless actresses paraded as his companions. They were never lovers, only decoys. Each romance carefully staged to keep the real story buried. But in the shadows, Tab lived a different life. Private encounters with men whispered about but never named. Secret weekends hidden from photographers. Some claimed the studio even hired investigators to tail him, ensuring no scandal escaped. His beauty was both his fortune and his prison. One slip, one photo, and the empire built around his face would collapse. The cost was heavy. In his memoir years later, Hunter confessed, "I wasn't chosen for my acting. I was chosen because I was willing to be quiet and beautiful in the way Hollywood needed." Those words revealed the truth. His career was built not on freedom, but on obedience. There were nights when the mask nearly slipped. A friend remembered hearing him laugh at parties, until suddenly, the laughter stopped, replaced by silence. The silence of a man who knew his entire world could collapse with one headline. Another recalled him staring out of a car window after a premiere, his smile fading the second the flashbulbs were gone. He was always performing, even in private, afraid the walls themselves might be listening. To the public, Tab Hunter was the golden idol of the 1950s. But to those who looked closer, his life was something darker. A performance not on screen, but in survival itself. A star adored by millions, yet imprisoned by the very image that made him famous. And maybe that's the real story. That the boy who embodied the American dream spent decades terrified of waking up, knowing that the moment he stopped pretending, everything Hollywood promised him would disappear. Sal Mineo, the boy with the dark eyes, the restless smile, the dangerous beauty that made him unforgettable and rebel without a cause. To the world, he was James Dean's doomed companion, a symbol of teenage confusion and tenderness. But behind the role that made him famous was a shadow he never truly outran. Hollywood insiders whispered that his story began long before the cameras rolled. In 1955, when Sal was barely 16, he was invited to the private home of a powerful producer. Officially, it was for a dialogue session, a chance for the young actor to prove himself. But friends later claimed Sal described it differently. They said I'd get the part if I could convince them I was soft enough. That night, he stayed. The next morning, his name appeared on the audition list for Rebel Without a Cause. Did he trade innocence for opportunity? No one could prove it. Sal himself never outright confessed, but he didn't deny it either. In a 1973 television interview, one that was later cut before broadcast, he said coldly, "In Hollywood, if you don't satisfy them, they won't remember your name." The role made him a star, but James Dean's sudden death left Sal adrift. Without Dean, without the machine pushing him forward, the offers slowed. The spotlight dimmed, and the whispers grew louder. Some said he was discarded, passed from director to director, expected to give more than just his talent in exchange for scraps of work. One report claimed he had arrangements in Palm Springs, exclusive private deals with filmmakers who promised him small roles in exchange for silence and obedience. By the late 1960s, Sal was fighting to reclaim himself. He turned to the stage, directing plays, joining underground art projects, speaking more openly about what Hollywood demanded of its young stars. For the first time, he seemed ready to pull back the curtain. A week before his death, he allegedly told a CBS reporter, "I've got names, photos, tapes. If something happens to me, go find them." Then came February 12th, 1976, West Hollywood. Sal Mineo was murdered outside his apartment. The police called it a robbery, but his wallet was still in his pocket, his watch still on his wrist. What was missing was his briefcase, the one some believed held everything he planned to expose. The case was officially closed. A drifter was convicted. Yet to this day, many refuse to believe it was random. The timing, the missing evidence, the whispered threats, it all pointed to something darker. Sal Mineo's death remains a scar, not just on Hollywood, but on the hidden history of its golden age. To millions, he was a gifted actor gone too soon. To those who knew the shadows he lived in, his murder was something else entirely, a warning. That in a town built on secrets, some stories will never be told. And some truths will kill you before the audience ever hears them. Montgomery Clift never smiled for long in front of the camera. His gaze always held a quiet sadness, as if it belonged somewhere else, or perhaps nowhere at all. And maybe that made sense, because this world, Hollywood, was never truly his. It was a place that thrived on youth, beauty, and silence. And in his earliest days, whispers claimed that before the spotlight, before the fame, he had sold his body just to land a role. According to diary entries said to have been left by Elizabeth Taylor, Clift once confessed a haunting memory. In his youth, a friend introduced him to a well-connected stage director. The price for opportunity was not talent, but intimacy. When Taylor asked if he regretted it, Clift's reply was chillingly calm. No. But every time I remember it, I feel like a part of me died. That sentence lingered like a ghost over everything he became. In 1945, before anyone knew his name, Clift was invited to a private audition at a grand estate, the kind of mansion that swallowed secrets in velvet curtains. Acclaimed director Joshua Logan was said to be searching for a new face. What happened inside remained unspoken. What was remembered decades later was this: Clift didn't leave after the audition. He stayed 3 long days. An elderly housemaid later claimed she saw him in tears, pacing the halls, broken but silent. Yet when he walked out through the gates, he carried a contract. It was the beginning, but also the wound that never healed. Even after stardom wrapped itself around him, Clift dodged every question about how it all began. When pressed by Variety about his earliest breaks, his answer was strange, almost coded. I started in theater, and in a few rooms where no one was watching. A line that sounded less like pride and more like confession. The weight of those rooms never left him. He carried them into every set, every close-up, every pause between lines. Off-screen, he lived in loneliness, fought battles with alcohol and pills, and wore his pain like a second skin. His beauty made him a star, but his secrets kept him a prisoner. By the mid-1950s, Hollywood had already given him a name: the boy with the haunted eyes. Directors adored his raw emotion, his ability to bleed on screen without shedding a tear. But friends saw the cracks. He often left parties abruptly, laughter cut short, slipping into silence as if terrified one wrong word could expose him. In 1966, at only 45, Montgomery Clift was found dead in his townhouse. His friend described the expression frozen on his face as a crooked smile. Not peaceful, not serene, but the bitter smile of a man who had carried too much for too long. No one knows exactly what he took to the grave, but one of his peers, a heartthrob once adored by an entire generation of schoolgirls, once admitted, "I laid down for someone I didn't love, just to live the life of a role I was never really chosen for." A confession that could have belonged to many men in Hollywood, perhaps even to Montgomery Clift himself. To the world, Rock Hudson was the ultimate leading man. Tall, broad-shouldered, a face carved from marble, and a voice that melted audiences. On screen, he was the fantasy every woman longed for. But behind Hollywood's golden age, whispers painted another portrait. Not of a man in control, but of a man controlled. As early as the 1950s, when Hudson was just another hopeful at Universal, he fell under the command of Henry Wilson, the most powerful manager in Hollywood, notorious for grooming young men in exchange for loyalty. Hudson was everything Wilson wanted: handsome, discreet, and pliable. According to a studio memo leaked decades later, one assistant scrawled, "He's obedient, polite, and ready to accompany clients if I nod." They called Hudson the perfect companion. And so he played the part. At Beverly Hills hotels, Palm Springs estates, smoky backroom gatherings, he appeared on cue. He poured drinks, charmed investors, and if the signal was given, disappeared quietly behind closed doors. No questions, no refusals. Years later, a recorded phone call between Wilson and producer Ross Hunter, retold in Scotty Bauer's memoir Full Service, carried a chilling line: "He can handle 2 in a night, as long as no one takes pictures." The machine knew his worth. When Hudson's fame exploded with Magnificent Obsession and Pillow Talk, he became more than a star. He was leverage. Rumors swirled that his presence at private soirees unlocked millions in quiet investment checks signed by wealthy men, entertained not just by Hudson's charm, but by Hudson himself. Behind the dazzling posters and glossy magazines was another life. Nights that began with tuxedos and champagne often ended in silence. Some claimed he returned home from these duties and sat motionless for hours, waiting for dawn to wash it away. A friend once recalled catching him stare at his reflection after a party, whispering, "It's not me they want, just the mask." He carried that mask for decades. Even when the world worshipped his roles as the perfect husband or the romantic dream, he lived with the knowledge that the price of success had been written in shadows. To break character, even once, could have shattered the empire built on his shoulders. But silence did not protect him forever. In 1985, when Hudson's AIDS diagnosis became public, the illusion cracked. The world that had once adored him now recoiled, as if the disease exposed not just his illness, but the truth he had been forced to bury all along. For Hollywood, it was scandal. For Hudson, it was finally a moment he could no longer hide. After his death, a crumpled note was said to contain just 7 words. "I was never allowed to say no." No one knows if the handwriting was truly his. No one can prove if it was confession or simply the echo of whispers that had haunted him all his life. But one thing is certain. Behind Rock Hudson's smile, behind the elegance, behind the legend of Hollywood's greatest leading man, there was a story written not in love, but in obedience. And perhaps that is the greatest tragedy. That the man who embodied desire for millions was in truth a prisoner of it. Richard Chamberlain, the TV doctor and his double life. To America in the early 1960s, Richard Chamberlain was the picture of perfection. As Dr. Kildare in NBC's hit medical drama, he was young, handsome, and trustworthy. The man mothers wished their daughters would marry, the kind of star whose smile sold magazines. He was crowned America's most eligible bachelor, and for a time, no face was more adored on television. But behind the glow of studio lights, Chamberlain lived a different reality. One built on silence, secrecy, and constant fear. Fear that one wrong move, one misplaced photograph, one lover who refused to stay quiet could end his career overnight. A former assistant told Hollywood Insider, he never left the studio with his lover. All meetings happened in his apartment, the windows shut, the curtains drawn, the phone unplugged. To some, it sounded like paranoia. But in Hollywood's hidden corridors, it was survival. Chamberlain, like many of his peers, was said to have faced after-hours auditions, midnight meetings in Beverly Hills mansions where talent was measured not by performance, but by compliance. If you pleased the right person, a role was yours. If not, you vanished. One rumor told of a network executive who demanded Chamberlain's company before greenlighting a role. Another spoke of a journalist who threatened to expose him, only to be silenced after a private visit arranged by his manager. Whether true or not, such whispers followed him for decades, creating an atmosphere where every glance carried the threat of exposure. When a male co-star once suggested going public, Chamberlain's reply was chilling. "If I lose this role because I love you, will you be able to feed me?" So he wore the mask. The perfect gentleman, the flawless bachelor. His life became a staged performance, arm in arm with actresses at premieres, posed photographs in glossy magazines, smiles that never cracked. Each romance was a decoy, each interview an act of deflection. But the cost was heavy. Friends recalled moments when Chamberlain's mask slipped. At parties, he sometimes withdrew mid-conversation, laughter dying on his lips. One remembered him pacing a hotel suite, whispering, "What if they find out? What if this is the last night?" The fear never left. For 40 years, Chamberlain lived this way, adored by millions, yet unable to live as himself. Only after retirement, when Hollywood no longer controlled him, did he peel the mask away. In his memoir, he admitted what many had long suspected, finally speaking aloud the truth that had haunted him his entire career. But by then, decades were already lost. The roles he might have taken, the relationships he might have embraced, the life he might have lived, all sacrificed at the altar of survival. Richard Chamberlain outlived the machine that once owned him, but the scars of secrecy never left. His story is a reminder of Hollywood's darkest bargain, that the system which made stars out of beautiful young men often demanded their silence, their obedience, and sometimes their souls. And finally, we come to Farley Granger, the boy who seemed far too innocent for Hollywood, yet carried shadows as dark as any of the others. Audiences first saw him in Alfred Hitchcock's Rope, 1948. He was 22. Soft features, dreamy eyes, and a kind of vulnerability that made people lean closer. On screen, he was fragile, almost delicate, the perfect victim or the perfect lover. Off-screen, that same fragility was both his gift and his curse. In 1950, he crossed paths with playwright Arthur Laurents. To the world, Laurents was a respected writer, sharp, brilliant, celebrated. To Granger, he was something else entirely: mentor, lover, gatekeeper. Their relationship lasted more than 15 years, a mixture of passion, dependency, and control. In his memoir, Include Me Out, Granger admitted, "Arthur taught me how to love, how to pretend, and how to lie down when I needed to keep a role." That single line became a whisper that never stopped. For every part Granger won, there were rumors. For every audition, speculation. In smoky bars, on sound stages, people muttered, "Who did he sleep with this week?" On the set of Strangers on a Train, the jokes turned dangerous. A young assistant, careless with his words, was fired after making a sly remark about Granger's private life. The message was clear. Some truths were never to be spoken aloud. But in Hollywood, silence is never just silence. Insiders claimed Arthur controlled nearly everything. Which scripts landed on Granger's desk, which parties he attended, even which people he was allowed to be seen with. One colleague remembered Granger declining a dinner invitation, then whispering, "I can't. Arthur wouldn't like it." Another recalled how, at a studio gathering, Laurents stood quietly in the corner, watching every move, as though holding a leash invisible to everyone but Farley himself. Still, the rewards were real. Roles arrived, applause followed. He was young, handsome, in demand, but the cost was steep. Friends remembered sudden mood shifts, laughter cut short, his eyes drifting off as though trapped in a memory. One actor, who briefly shared the stage with him, said, "Farley looked like a man being held together by strings someone else was pulling." As the years passed, the power balance shifted. Hollywood moved on. New stars rose. Granger drifted from the silver screen to theater and smaller projects. Away from the spotlight, he lived more openly, but the shadow of those early compromises never disappeared. Whispers clung to him, long after they should have faded. And yet, unlike many of his peers, Farley chose not to deny the past. In one of his final interviews, his words were startling in their honesty. "I loved. I was used. But I don't regret it, because in this world, if you don't let them touch your body, they'll never let you touch the spotlight." Hollywood has always promised dreams, but it rarely showed the price. Behind the lights, the applause, and the headlines, there were rooms locked to the public, places where careers were made and innocence was lost. And that leaves the question that refuses to fade. How many stars truly rose on talent, and how many were lifted by secrets they could never escape? Some truths remain hidden. Some stories buried forever, but the whispers never stop. If you want more of Hollywood's hidden shadows, the scandals and secrets no studio ever dared reveal, subscribe now and tell us in the comments, was it talent or something far darker? What happens when fame, weirdness, and chaos all come together? In 2025, the world's 10 most glamorous gay celebrities didn't just chase the spotlight, they weathered scandals, breakups, and bold transformations that kept us glued to the headlines. From red carpets to candid confessions, they turned pain into power and drama into gold. Buckle up. Here are the top 10 gay celebrities who made 2025 unforgettable. Luke Evans, the Hollywood rebel, lives life on his own terms. Luke Evans has always been confident on screen, in control, and unfazed. But 2025 has reminded us that the Welsh heartthrob is more than just an actor with a jawline created by the gods. He is a complex, openly gay man who has quietly changed the industry without ever asking for recognition. Raised in a conservative Welsh family, Luke did not come from the red carpet world. He fought his way into it. Before he became famous, he had to fight, facing judgment, rejection, and pressure to hide parts of himself in order to succeed. But he didn't stay hidden forever. When he arrived in Hollywood, he was already a storm brewing. What makes 2025 different is how he began to shed the layers, not loud or attention-seeking. It was genuine and relatable. That year, he opened up about growing up, his inner struggles, and the long road to coming to terms with his truth. People expected glitz and drama. Instead, Luke delivered the real thing, and fans couldn't help but love it. While other actors were chasing the buzz, Luke was busy with real work. He starred in 2 major films in 2025, each of which reminded us of his versatility. From intense action to tender, emotional roles that brought critics to tears. And behind the scenes, he mentored young gay actors, pushed for more inclusive casting, and steered clear of the rumor traps that have tripped so many up. But don't let his calm demeanor fool you. Luke Evans has had his share of tumultuous moments. He ended a long-term relationship which led to tabloids speculating about his love life. There were photos, close friends, and even a scathing social media post that fans have dissected as a map to his heart. But Luke, he didn't take the bait. Instead of responding to every whisper, he let the world in on the action as a man who didn't care about the noise. That's the Evans effect. Absolute calm with a touch of mystery that keeps the world guessing. He's never let his homosexuality define his career, but he's never hidden it to get ahead. In 2025, that balance feels like a power move. He's no longer fighting for a place. He's carving out his own, inviting the next generation to sit down with him. He proved that presence doesn't always have to be shouted to be heard. Sometimes it's whispered through every role, every red carpet step, every moment you choose to be true to yourself, even when it would be easier. Luke Evans made it through 2025 without a scandal, but with a story that resonates even more. And for gay people on the outside, seeing someone succeed without compromise is revolutionary. Skip 4 if you think Luke is the type to turn quiet confidence into queer power. But while Luke's revolution was quiet, the next star is making headlines by doing the opposite. Breaking fashion boundaries, bending gender norms on the runway, and proving that authenticity can be as bold as a wedding dress in Paris. Enter the bold world of Felix Neiter. In 2025, Felix Neiter didn't just walk the catwalk, he redefined what a catwalk is. The tall, lean German model entered 2025 with a breathtaking beauty, but it wasn't just his looks that made him unforgettable. Felix became a symbol of gay courage in an industry still clinging to rigid stereotypes and predictable gender roles, and his refusal to fit into any of them made him a star. Felix made his debut on the European catwalks, and quickly, with a string of contracts, became one of Germany's most sought-after male models. But 2025 was the year his presence exploded. It wasn't just about being photographed. It was about how he used fashion as a weapon, a statement, a rebellion. He strode down the runway in both tailored suits and flowing gowns, blurring the lines with a confidence that left audiences in awe. In an industry still dominated by rigid masculinity, Felix stood out boldly and proudly. a gay man who never compromised or traded authenticity for acceptance. Campaign after campaign, luxury brands wanted him. Magazines put him on the cover not just for his body, but for the conversations he carried with him. Felix understood that fashion is more than just fabric. It's culture, and culture changes when one person is brave enough to break the mold. From Berlin to Paris, from pride-themed photo shoots to haute couture shows, Felix was everywhere. Of course, his boldness was met with fierce opposition. Some critics have called his choices a gimmick. Others have questioned whether his gender-bending fashion stunts are too provocative. But Felix is undaunted. He has embraced it. In interviews, he has reminded fans that visibility is never about making people feel comfortable. "The world doesn't change when we play it safe," he once said. And in 2025, he did. Social media has only amplified his influence. Clips of him strutting down the runway in lace and leather have gone viral on TikTok. Fans have embraced him not just as a model, but as an icon. Felix didn't flaunt his gay identity for fame. He showed what freedom looks like when you stop asking for permission to exist. For LGBTQ+ youth across Europe and beyond, he became proof that beauty and courage can go hand in hand. By the end of that year, Felix Nieder was more than just a model. He was the epitome of what the modern queer community should be. Part fashion rebel, part culture disruptor, and completely unabashed. His body may have sold clothes, but his spirit sold something bigger. Hope, pride, and the belief that queerness should always be front and center, never hidden. So while Hollywood had Luke Evans redefining quiet strength, Germany gave us Felix Nieder redefining bold authenticity. Two sides of the same queer coin, both unstoppable. And now, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching? Comment your country and see how truly global Felix Nieder's courageous energy is. Zane Phillips didn't just rise in 2025, he exploded. Tall, broad-shouldered, and charismatic, Zane has a presence that makes people want to look up. But this year wasn't just about looks. It was about how he made Hollywood a place where he could challenge himself, while creating a space for gay men to be seen as romantic leads, action figures, and unapologetically loving. If his breakout moment in Fire Island gave audiences a taste of his star power, 2025 cemented it. This is the year Zane Phillips became unmissable. Netflix's Glamorous kept him in the spotlight, but it's his unabashed honesty that sets him apart. Zane isn't afraid to show his true self. He's always been true to himself, proud to be gay, using every interview and red carpet moment to remind the industry that being gay isn't a limitation, it's a lever. His Instagram is a series of ambitious images and fashion statements, but behind the flashy images, Zane has cultivated something deeper: representation. His presence means something special. For young LGBTQ+ fans watching from small towns, seeing someone like Zane dominate the screen was not only exciting, but revolutionary. He wasn't a sidekick. He wasn't boxed in or hidden, he was a star. And Hollywood took notice. Casting directors began eyeing him for roles that were typically reserved for straight people. It was no small feat in an industry still grappling with queer representation in blockbusters. But Zane was up for the challenge. He wanted to prove that a gay actor could lead a series, star in a romance, or steal a scene in a TV series without being pigeonholed into stereotypes. Of course, that presence brought its own storms. The tabloids dug in. Every friendship became a rumored romance. Every red carpet date was dissected for clues. Critics questioned whether his gym-honed physique overshadowed his talent. But Zane responded in the only way that mattered, through his work. His performance in 2025 was humane, compelling, and undeniable, reminding everyone that behind the six-pack was an actor with depth. Off-screen, Zayn has used his platform intentionally. He has partnered with LGBTQ+ organizations, appeared at pride events, and shared the pressures gay men face in Hollywood. The unwritten rules, the stereotypes, the endless demands to hide or express their gender identity. His honesty has touched the hearts of his fans. They see him as more than just an actor, but also as a voice. By the end of 2025, Zayn Phillips will be more than just a handsome face on streaming platforms. He is a full-fledged gay icon, redefining what it means to be a leading man in modern Hollywood. He balances desire and thought, charm and courage, and he is stronger for it. If Luke Evans represents quiet power and Felix Nieder is the embodiment of bold rebellion, then Zayn Phillips is a reminder that being gay in Hollywood isn't about fitting into a mold. It's about breaking it. And speaking of breaking the mold, our next star has not only survived scandal, but also made it big. And now it's the king of Flash, Chris Appleton. Chris Appleton, the king of glamour, faced the scandal of 2025 with style. If you like your dramas to be both heartbreaking and exciting, there's no better story than Chris Appleton's 2025. The celebrity hairstylist and groom has been making heads turn, not because of his impressive red carpet appearances, but because he's lived through his public dramas and kept them looking so intact. Chris is already a household name in the beauty world. His fingers have created Kim Kardashian's glossy look and J.Lo's sleek glamour. That's him. But this year, he stepped into the bigger spotlight. Early 2025, the internet was abuzz. Chris had quietly divorced and then reunited with actor Lucas Gage. Like a romantic comedy, they got engaged, married, and broke up again in a matter of weeks. Swipe right to see Fast and Furious, and everyone was living it up as emotions ran high. But while the tabloids tried to trumpet and fan accounts leaked receipts, Chris kept his cool. There was no public announcement, no Clint Eastwood-esque magazine stare-down. He and Lucas walked the line between divorce and drama like fashion models gliding through red velvet curtains, elegant, beautiful, and a little chilly. Yet despite the storm, Chris's brand remained undaunted. In fact, he leaned in. His Instagram feed, part high-fashion editorial, part sun-drenched gym selfie, began trending on TikTok. His post-crisis glower became the cultural moment of the year. People not only admired him, but also admired his grace. The silence that was arranged after the scandal transformed into an aura of unshakable confidence. Aside from the emotional scandal, Chris has also achieved success in his career. He has brought glam to LA Pride parades, worn elaborate buns for gay celebrities, and collaborated with cosmetics brands that are finally fully embracing the LGBTQ+ community. He has hosted talks on self-expression, released collections of clothed and nude portraits, and even attended drag charity galas, looking resplendent in high fashion and full of queerness. Honestly, his rise from the scandal has been about more than just overcoming emotional turmoil. It has been about rebuilding, reinventing, and becoming more iconic than ever. In a year filled with fleeting romances and fleeting regrets, Chris Appleton danced to a slower beat, calm, fierce, unrepentant. It was impossible to ignore the tragedies, but he turned them into power, into aesthetics, into the quiet grace of I am who I am that only the most confident of people can pull off. And that's truly amazing. So who's emerged from their own 2025 scandals and become even more influential in the LGBTQ+ beauty space? It's the kind of transformation that brings both judgment and joy. And Chris Appleton did it in cinematic fashion. Give one a pass if Chris turns a scandal into a style statement. And while Chris has proven that chaos can be high fashion, our next star's journey isn't about glamour. It's about survival, reinvention, and the fight to reclaim your own story. Come to Spain and talk about Omar Ayuso. Omar Ayuso, Spain's gay icon, confronts his demons in 2025. If you thought Omar Ayuso's story was over when Elite wrapped up its final season, think again. 2025 hasn't been a quiet year for the Spanish heartthrob, and while the headlines may have faded, Omar's personal journey has reached new heights. You may have first seen him as Omar Shana, a gay Muslim student navigating love, religion, and rebellion in Netflix's Elite. It was a role that flipped the script for gay characters on international television, and it brought Omar's intense gaze and raw acting into the global spotlight. But such a rapid rise to fame has had its toll. And this year, Omar finally opened up about the dark stuff behind the scenes. In an emotional interview earlier this year, Omar revealed that he hit rock bottom soon after his rise to fame. The pressure to meet fan expectations, stay politically correct, and present a different version of himself on the internet became too much. "I lost myself completely," he admitted. "I don't know who I am without the camera." That raw honesty lifted the veil on the reality of instant fame. It can give you everything, but it can also take you away. But that's where 2025 took a different turn. Instead of disappearing, Omar chose to come back stronger. This year, he joined the cast of Marilandra, a new Spanish film that explores intergenerational homosexuality. It's not a teen drama or a topless photo shoot. It's a role that allows him to dig deeper, challenge norms, and redefine what gay masculinity looks like on screen. And that's exactly what Omar wants to do. He's also set to debut in a stage play with Tony Acosta, proving that he's not afraid to trade the spotlight for raw spotlight. It's a bold move, but very Omarian. He's always been about substance over form, even as the world insists he's an icon first and an artist second. And while his Instagram is still a thirst trap, his captions have changed. Less polished, more authentic. You can tell he's no longer playing to the algorithm. Instead, he's reclaiming his story, post by post, roll by roll, brave sentence by sentence. In a media culture obsessed with over-the-top exposure, Omar Ayuso is mastering the rare art of quiet reinvention. He's reminding fans that being queer, brown, and vulnerable on the global stage isn't just about visibility. It's about resistance. So while others chase TikTok fame and instant clout, Omar is taking his time, choosing his moments, and staying true to himself. That's why he's not just trending, he's enduring. Skip ahead too, if you believe Omar's transformation isn't just about his looks, it's personal, powerful, and completely deserved. And while Omar found strength in slowing down, our next star has embraced the spotlight head-on, stepping out of the shadows and becoming a true gay icon. Let's talk about another breakout Spanish actor, Manu Rios. Manu Rios, from elite teen idol to gay trailblazer. When Elite first debuted, fans couldn't help but marvel at Manu Rios. He was as naturally handsome, stylish, and sophisticated as a pre-Raphaelite dream. But 2025 was more than just a look for him. It was the year Manu transformed from dreamy background image to full-fledged gay icon, and along the way created a storm of glamour. After his breakout role in Elite, Manu filled fan pages around the world with photoshopped images, artful photo shoots, and avant-garde fashion. But for much of his career, his identity was largely hidden. Many assumed he was gay without much public confirmation. That ambiguity caused fan obsession and a lot of pressure. So when Manu finally spoke out, it wasn't soft or shy. It was a change. He shared that while his gay identity had never been a secret to the community, sharing it publicly made him feel self-conscious. In 2025, amid mounting pressure and online rumors, he posted a simple caption, "I'm gay, always have been. It's nice to finally say it." It wasn't hyperbole. It wasn't hyperbole. It was just him, brave, honest, shining in the spotlight. The moment made waves. Headlines declared it a milestone for Generation Z representation in Spain. But for Manu, it was just the beginning. From then on, he was completely confident in his new voice. He has walked the runway for high-end fashion, kissed male dancers during halftime shows, and spoken candidly in interviews about body dysmorphia, gender identity, and queer pain. When asked why he chose this moment, he didn't shy away. "Because silence, while safe, isn't who I am anymore," he said. His fans, longtime fans and new allies alike, celebrated the revelation. But as usual, controversy erupted. Some criticized him for coming out amid the pressure. Others questioned whether his coming out on Instagram was too ostentatious, too staged. Manu graciously responded, "I love that people want to know more, but I'm not being real anymore. This is it." The humility and defiance in that statement only drew people in. Then came the creative explosion. He released an artful music video, sexy, dark, unmissable. He starred in a critically acclaimed short film about queerness and immigration. He collaborated with queer artists across Europe. He was no longer just a face. He was an artist, refusing to let his identity become a platform. By the end of 2025, Manu Rios was no longer just a beloved actor. He was a moment, a living reminder that queer youth can exist openly, boldly, and without apology. His journey from simmering speculation to powerful statement was not only deeply personal, but also profoundly revolutionary. Give it 3 stars if Manu's rise from soft-coded idol to queer legend inspires you. Which star has left the deepest impression on you so far? Who do you find the most successful, inspiring? And if you want to continue following the stories of queer icons making waves around the world, be sure to subscribe and support the channel, because the next chapter of this list just keeps getting more exciting. Kit Connor's 2025 wasn't just a year, it was a revelation. For years, fans knew him as Nick Nelson, the charming football player who romanced Charlie on Netflix's Heartstopper, one of the most authentic depictions of gay love on television. But behind the applause and viral clips, Kit carried the weight of expectation, speculation, and the relentless attention that came with becoming an overnight Gen Z icon. The pressure came to a head in 2022 when Kit felt compelled to come out as bisexual after months of online harassment and accusations of queer baiting. It was a moment that showed just how cruel fandom could be, and it hurt. But in 2025, Kit didn't just survive, he turned it into his strength. This was the year he stopped being a rising star and became a force in his own right. On screen, Kit continued to captivate. He balanced his role in the final chapters of Heartstopper with bold new projects that broke away from the teen romance stereotype. One of his most talked about performances came in a gritty indie film that forced audiences to see him as more than just a sweet guy, but a serious, thoughtful, risk-taking actor. Critics praised his ability to shed his boy-next-door persona and embrace complexity. But Kit's story in 2025 is not only professional, but personal. For the first time, he began to openly discuss the toll fame has taken on his mental health. In interviews, he admits to feeling lonely as millions of eyes scrutinize his every move, question his identity, and demand authenticity on their own terms. Instead of letting that scrutiny define him, Kit reframes it. He speaks candidly about boundaries, privacy, and the right of gay people to come out on their own timetable. His honesty has earned him not only sympathy, but respect. Social media, once a battleground, has become a platform for him to control. Kit posts less, but more intentionally. Behind-the-scenes shots from film sets, moments with co-stars, and glimpses of his training reveal a young man embracing adulthood with quiet confidence. Fans who once pressured him have banded together, recognizing the power of coming out in the public eye as a gay man. And let's not overlook the obvious. Kit Connor in 2025 looks every inch the leading man. His broad shoulders, sharp jawline, and natural charisma have turned red carpets into viral events. But unlike so many other young stars, Kit refuses to let his looks dictate the narrative. He wants substance, and he delivers. At the end of the year, Kit Connor isn't just another teen idol graduating to adult roles. He's a queer artist defining success on his own terms, unapologetic, intentional, and inspiring. His journey shows that being bisexual in Hollywood doesn't mean being pigeonholed or erased. It's rewriting the script. From the football pitch of Heartstopper to the bright lights of global stardom, Kit Connor's 2025 album proves that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stand your ground, speak your truth, and keep moving forward. And while his transformation has fans cheering, the next name on our list reminds us that resilience can be just as powerful when it's born from rejection. Get ready for Jeremy Pope. Jeremy Pope, from studio snub to healing hero. Imagine being told you're not trustworthy just because you're gay. That's exactly what Jeremy Pope faced in early 2025 when a studio executive questioned his ability to connect with female co-stars because of his sexuality. Instead of cowering, he walked away. And in doing so, he sparked a shift that would shape the rest of the year. Jeremy has always spoken from the heart, not the ego. He first won over audiences on Pose and Broadway, earning Tony and Emmy nominations before most people knew how to pronounce his name. But 2025 is different. It's not about glitz and glamour. It's about facing rejection and rising above it. When he walked away from his studio film, many would have considered it career-destroying. But Jeremy redefined it. Soon after, A24 cast him in The Inspection, an emotional indie about a gay black man who joins the Marines during Don't Ask, Don't Tell. The role, both emotional and brutal, became his rebirth. He carried his scars on screen as a man pushed to his limits only to discover self-love in the ashes. Audiences didn't just see a performance, they felt a story of healing. Critics nodded in approval. Award ceremonies listened. That year, Jeremy was nominated for a Golden Globe, not just for his performance, but for his authenticity. But the rise didn't stop there. Off-screen, he began to reveal more of himself. He shared honest stories about growing up gay and black in harsh environments where masculinity was often performed rather than felt. He saw his roles as emotional redemption arcs, a way to reclaim a voice and identity that the industry had tried so hard to hide. But fame came with vulnerability. Fans overanalyzed every red carpet pose. Edits were relentless, and whispers followed him like ghosts. Some labeled him too gay. Others questioned whether he had grown up too fast. But Jeremy embraced it, showing grace rather than excuses. He used interviews not to prove his worth, but to share his journey of finding it. That year, he also took a risk. He's released new music, supported social justice causes, and created LGBT-centric work that's made his voice resonate. He's not chasing fame, he's chasing truth. In every choice he makes, he delivers the same message: art first, brand second. So why is 2025 such a transformative year for Jeremy Pope? He's faced career hurdles. He's dared to use pain as motivation. He's turned rejection into roles that have healed millions. And through it all, he's embraced his LGBT identity, not as an accessory, but as a strength. Jeremy hasn't just recovered, he's risen on his own terms. Skip ahead to the year if you think Jeremy's wounded and triumphant return deserves all the headlines. And now, we want to hear from you. Which country are you watching from? Leave a comment below, and our team will get back to you as soon as possible. Taylor Zakar Perez may not have publicly labeled his sexuality, but in 2025 his name was everywhere in conversations about queer storytelling. The Chicago-born actor, already admired for his breakout in The Kissing Booth 2, had the world in his grip thanks to Red, White, and Royal Blue, Amazon Prime's romantic juggernaut about a US president's son falling in love with a British prince. And while co-star Nicholas Galitzine and the story itself carried the crown of representation, Taylor's performance as Alex Claremont Diaz made him an instant queer icon, whether he asked for the title or not. Fans didn't just watch Red, White, and Royal Blue, they lived it. Taylor's portrayal of Alex was electric, funny, passionate, politically sharp, and hopelessly romantic. His chemistry with Nicholas burned so brightly that social media spun it into endless edits, fanfics, and conspiracy theories about their off-screen connection. Every red carpet appearance, every interview side glance became fuel for speculation. And while Taylor never publicly confirmed anything about his own sexuality, his willingness to embody a queer character with full sincerity made him beloved across the LGBTQ+ community. 2025 turned that admiration into full-blown stardom. Beyond the film, Taylor became one of Hollywood's most talked-about young actors. He landed magazine covers that celebrated him as a modern leading man, tall, sculpted, and effortlessly charismatic. His Instagram, filled with travel shots, shirtless workouts, and behind-the-scenes candids, only fueled his rise. But what separated Taylor from so many other pretty faces was how he carried himself in the whirlwind. He never mocked the queer speculation, never dismissed the role that made him a star, and instead leaned into gratitude for the fans who lifted him. Of course, the speculation never stopped. Was he queer? Was he straight? Did it matter? To many fans, Taylor Zakhar Perez represented a rare kind of Hollywood presence. Someone who didn't box himself in, who played queer roles with heart, and who respected the importance of the stories he was telling, even if he didn't claim them as his own. That subtlety made his place in queer pop culture complicated, but also fascinating. Outside of the screen, Taylor used his platform for advocacy in quieter but meaningful ways. He spoke about diversity in casting, the pressures on young actors, and the importance of telling love stories that don't always look like the Hollywood norm. He appeared at film festivals, walked high-profile carpets in tailored perfection, and continued to spark the kind of buzz studios dream of. By the end of 2025, Taylor Zakhar Perez remained an enigma. Not openly gay, not publicly labeled, but firmly embedded in queer cultural conversations. For some, that ambiguity was frustrating. For others, it was proof that the power of representation doesn't always rest on the labels an actor wears, but on the sincerity they bring to the screen. Taylor's year reminded us that visibility takes many forms. Whether he ever speaks about his personal identity or not, his work in Red, White, and Royal Blue became part of queer cinematic history. And in 2025, that was more than enough to keep him in the spotlight. And maybe that's the perfect way to close this list. 10 different stars, 10 different stories, all reminding us that queerness is not one path, but many. And each one has the power to change the world. And that's it. 10 queer celebrities who aren't just making waves in 2025, they're owning them. Whether they're breaking hearts, breaking barriers, or simply rocking the internet, these celebrities have reminded us that being queer isn't a limitation, it's a powerful move. From emotional red carpet moments to jaw-dropping career moves, their journeys prove one thing. Sometimes being bold, daring, and chaotic is exactly what the world needs. So which name shocked you the most? Which comeback inspired you the most? Leave your answer in the comments, and don't forget to tell us where you're watching from. Oh, and if you're not already, hit that subscribe button or don't. But if you don't, you might miss the next scandal, the next beauty, or the next star about to break the algorithm. It's up to you. See you soon, stay strong, stay proud, And keep watching.